Welcome to JW3 Online. We're so glad that you've tuned in. And if you don't know who we are, JW3 are a one-of-a-kind Jewish community centre in London that's open to everyone. If you want to know more about us, like us on Facebook or YouTube, and check out the rest of our events online. We hope you enjoy the programme. Hi everyone, and welcome to Young JW3's latest series, Denomination, with me, Joe Hyman, and our guest this week, Rabbi Eryn London. We are a denomination, a nation of denominations, made up of Jews of all different types and stripes, and we should celebrate them. You may have about other communities, learn about different types of Jews, learn about their communities, because we believe that unity comes from knowing about each other and celebrating both where we are the same and where we are different. Each week we'll hear from an emerging Jewish leader about their denomination, community, and what matters to them. If you're watching tonight, tell us what denomination you connect to and why. We'd love the conversation to continue on our social media platforms. But for now, let's welcome our speaker, Rabbi Eryn London. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Joe, for having me here.
So good to see you, and thank you so much for being part of this. We're really excited to have you. Before we start, let's have a difficult question first. If you had to throw out what denomination you define as in this particular space, what would you say it was for the audience?
I would say modern Orthodox, but some people might say it's liberal Orthodox or what was known as open Orthodox, of an amalgamation of all of those.
Cool. Okay, great. Well, let's hold that thought. Everyone hold that thought, kind of modern Orthodox, liberal Orthodox, potentially open Orthodox. These things get complicated, and this is why we're here to unpack what all this means so people at home can understand a little bit more about you and people who affiliate with communities that you value. So let's talk a little bit about your journey to become a rabbi. It's not hugely common in the UK for young people to go into the rabbinate. I can hear from your accent that you're not from the UK, but tell us a little bit about why you became a rabbi to begin with.
So, wow, I became a rabbi because this is a horrible answer, but it's true. It made sense. Throughout my childhood growing up, I loved learning Torah. I loved being part of the Jewish community. I was very active in building community and wanted to be doing communal leadership and pastoral care and teaching Torah. And all of that together is a rabbi.
That sounds brilliant. I'm looking forward to hearing more about it as we talk a bit further. But what I'm going to do now is something that we do throughout all of our denominations. And this is the Denomination Minute Challenge. And this is to just set the tone, to get everything out there and hear from you, in your words, what your denomination or community values and what it's about. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to do that in 60 seconds only. So no kind of repetition, deviation, any of that, just a minute. And we're going to have a timer up to make sure that you stick to it. So are you up for the challenge?
I think I'm up for the challenge.
Okay, brilliant. All right, so let's get the timer up and see what we can do. All right, go.
So I would say that my view of modern Orthodoxy, liberal Orthodoxy, open Orthodoxy is a denomination that focuses on the idea that of the divinity of the Torah. So the Torah came from God, observance of halacha, of Jewish law. And with that, Orthodoxy is not extremely rigid. And so there is also room for inclusivity. So talking about how to create space for women and women's leadership, openness for LGBTQ plus people, respecting people of their struggles within religion. Also, what are other people doing and how do we have have that connectivity? And that is what I have 10 seconds more. And being prepared to engage with others while also saying that there is rabbinic authority and room for challenging that.
Yes. All right. That's a minute. Really well done. That was pretty impressive. I got tradition, belief in kind of the divinity of the Torah, the Jewish scripture, but also kind of a sensitivity to inclusion and kind of rights for women within the context of a Jewish sphere. Really exciting. And before we kind of move into the specifics of what your community, the one that kind of you would relate to most, looks like, let's zoom back. How did this denomination, this community start? What does kind of it's clear from what you're saying, kind of modern Orthodox, open Orthodox, liberal Orthodox. Those words are, I guess, less difficult than other denominations' names, which may have been more self-defined. But these seem to be like regular words, liberal, more open-minded. But how did it start? What's its history? Tell us a little bit about that so we understand where it came from.
So I would start with original modern Orthodox was a term used for those who wanted to bridge together what was known as Torah umada, Torah and science, so that it was okay to study both secular subjects and Judaic subjects. And you can see that very much in America, Yeshiva University, that was the goalpost. But eventually, since around the early 90s, there's also been a number of shifts. So 1990s. So with that, in modern Orthodoxy, there's been a number of institutions that have been formed, such as the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, JOFA, EDA, Yeshivat Chovevei Torah, which is a yeshiva in New York, which was founded in 1999, and Yeshivat Maharat, which was one of the first Orthodox institution in America ordaining women, which was founded in 2009. And then also there's the Institute of Jewish Ideals, the International Rabbinic Fellowship. And in Israel, there's also Beit Marasha and Beit Hillel and Ne'emanei Torah Va'avodah. And all of a sudden, so slowly, these things started to come about and shift and change, but also change differently in different communities. So it is not streamlined, I would say. That and also not all people from each institution believe all the things that all the other people within that institution believe. And also there's, some institutions do things that other institutions don't fully agree with or accept. So it's also individual and also institutional. That is the short history of all that.
Interesting. So it seems like a lot of organizations formed to address a need that you may have kind of highlighted before in your description in your denomination minute. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that need was for all these not denominations, but kind of smaller organizations to start rabbinic colleges, smicha institutes, that kind of thing. Why did they start? What was the need that was missing in the community?
So my understanding of what was missing was places that accepted people that were not being accepted. So for example, my understanding of the International Rabbinic Fellowship, the IRF, formed as a place that would also allow female scholars and eventually rabbis to also join, because the other institutions of rabbinic fellowships did not allow Orthodox women to join in because they couldn't be rabbis. Yeshivat Maharat, for example, started because there wasn't a place for women to study to become Orthodox rabbis. And so Rabbi Avi Weiss, along with Rabbi Sarah Horowitz and Rabbi Jeff Fox, founded a place for women to study so that they can receive smicha, so they can receive ordination. And so it was forming these different institutions. I know Beit Hillel in Israel was also forming a place where both men and women were able to sit on a fellowship. Not everyone has smicha, but most of the people are either rabbis or higher educators in advanced levels. So creating spaces for people who were not necessarily welcomed into other spaces, but who still identified as Orthodox and an Orthodox lifestyle.
That's really, really interesting and important. I'm really intrigued to hear about a little bit more about your journey, because you mentioned that you'd kind of wanted to be all these different things that amounted to being a rabbi. But I assume, based on the timeline that we've discussed, that wasn't an option when you were 16, say.
No, no, it was not an option at all. It was a thing that people used to joke about with for me. I grew up, so as Joe, you mentioned, I don't sound like I'm from here. I grew up in America. I grew up in New Jersey, in a small, actually relatively small town, but I went to yeshiva day school, so Orthodox Jewish school for all of my schooling, up until I went to university. And for as long as I can remember, people used to joke that I should be Yentl, the woman who dresses up like a man to go to yeshiva, because I loved learning Jewish studies. And I loved my Talmud class. Once we started learning Talmud when we were about 11 years old in school, it was my favorite class, and it was fun to argue and fun to put together the puzzle pieces. And I also remember helping out in shul, so running our junior congregation, teaching even when I was 11 and 12 years old, so starting then. And then I found my space into other places where I was building community, whether that was when I was living in Israel or when I was in university in America. I went to a place called Goucher College, which is a small liberal arts college, and was very involved in the Hillel there. And so helped with Shabbat meals and Parsha study, and created the Jewish life that I wanted. So building a way to go visit older adults on Shabbat, because, well, it started because I was bored, but it felt like a nice thing to do, and really building that Jewish community, and reaching out to others. And so it was kind of this push for everything. Everyone told me I should become a rabbi. I told them I can't. I wasn't a man. There wasn't a place for it to go. I identified as Orthodox, all of that. And I remember exactly where I was. I was in college. It was in 2008. And I got the post at the university, and I opened a letter that had a newspaper clipping that my father sent to me. And it was about Rabbi Sarah Horowitz, the first woman in America, Orthodox woman in America, to receive ordination. And in it, my father wrote a note saying, "You should do this." And I remember looking at it and being like, "What? Are you crazy?" I studied theater. I have a bachelor's in theater. I was about to start a master's in applied drama. And this was this really new and innovative and extremely controversial thing. And there my father was telling me to do it. I didn't do it right away. I did my master's, and then I moved to Israel, and I started studying in Pardes, and was in a Talmud shir, and then ended up in a advanced halacha shir, and really liked it. And so stayed for a second year for studying halacha. And then in Israel, I found a program that was offering smicha for women, for Orthodox women, at Midrash at Lindenham, and I applied and surprised myself that I got in, and was extremely excited about that. And that was in, I guess, 2012 was when I started, and received ordination in 2017. And so this thing that did not exist when I was a child is now a real thing. It's not just me.
That's amazing. No, it's not just you anymore, and it's incredible to see the amount of development that's happened with this community, especially also here in the UK with Miriam Arkush-Laurie and Lindsay Taylor-Goodhart and Rabbi Rami Smith, kind of being part of that community of people pursuing and also having Orthodox ordination as women. It's really exciting to see the community thriving. I have a question about just to explain to our audience, when we add the word liberal, open, or modern to the Orthodox sense, what is the Orthodox for you? And I guess the liberal, modern, open bit is the part where we bring in those who are excluded. But explain just in a couple of seconds kind of what the Orthodox element is. The Orthodox element, I guess, from what I hear from you, is about the divinity, the belief that the Torah is from God. Is that where it comes down to?
It comes down to that, and I think it also comes down to if and when I'm making a decision that pertains to Jewish law, to halacha, I'm going to go through the means and ways of halacha to make a decision. So it means going back to other responsa, going back to the Shulchan Aruch and the commentators there, and all the ones that are in between, and going back to the Talmud before making any other decisions, so that my decisions within the halachic frame are staying within the halachic frame.
Okay, great. So it's a kind of sense of, listening to your parents in some extent, but kind of times 100, kind of listening to all the voices that came before in some way and bringing them into the conversation with respect, I guess, and kind of using that to make your decisions about Jewish life. That's really, really, really interesting. I think and what I found helpful when talking about denomination are to look at kind of concrete examples, because sometimes the theory gets a bit much. It gets a bit much for me, and I think it must get a bit much for our audience. So I'm going to ask you about 3 things. All right, you can answer them in any way you'd like, with any order you'd like, but I'm going to ask you about 3 particular Jewish practices and ask you how they may be the same as other Jews, whether that be kind of Reform, liberal, Masorti Jews, or the same as Orthodox Jews or kind of Haredi Jews, how they kind of are similar to those different denominations, but also how they may differ. And what those 3 things are Shabbat, kind of a day of rest, however that looks in your community, food, kind of kashrut or any kind of ritual food laws, and prayer, kind of the synagogue, the Beit Knesset. What do those things look like? So Shabbat, food, synagogue. Now, for our audience, I just want to say that I know that's not an exhaustive list of all the examples I could have brought. And if you do have another example you want me to bring up in a future episode, then let me know and I'll try and include it, or we can continue the conversation in the comments on our Facebook or YouTube. But for now, let's look at these 3 kind of common examples. So Shabbat, kashrut, and prayer.
All right, I'll go in that order because it's easy to remember. So Shabbat, I would say that for the most part, I celebrate Shabbat in what would be seen as a traditional or Orthodox way of celebrating Shabbat. I light candles at sundown. From that time until the next night after sundown, I won't use my any electronic devices. I won't do work. I won't turn on and off my phones. I don't go into any cars or public transport. And well, pre-COVID times, I would go to synagogue. That would be part of my Shabbat, but now it's a lot of reading books and playing board games. I would say, sometimes a Shabbat meal might have singing of Zmirot, of songs. Starts with Kiddush and Motzi, which my house, either my husband or myself do. We actually switch on and off which week who's leading.
Oh, wow.
And same thing with Havdalah. So we do a rotation. That started because before I got married, I made Kiddush and Motzi and Havdalah in my house every week. It didn't matter if I had guests or not. It was my home, so I was going to be the one to be leading those things. And so that's about Shabbat. It's a day of resting, lots of reading, nice weather is walking, and times where it's safe going to shul.
Okay, great.
So kashrut, again, I would say is traditional Orthodox observances of kosher. So I don't mix meat and milk. I personally wait 3 hours between eating meat and dairy. That is based on different people's customs. Some people wait 6, some people wait 1. Meat needs to be ritually slaughtered. And for me, all food either needs to have a certification or be on a certification list, like they have here in other countries. In the States, everything has a symbol on it. So that's kosher for me.
Interesting. Okay. And what does prayer look like? Does prayer change when you're open, liberal, modern Orthodox in the way that you are?
So prayer can. So I would say that many people in my community believe that all people need to or are obligated in prayer 3 times a day. Most synagogue spaces, all synagogue spaces will have what's known as a mechitza, a partition that separates men and women. So men and women will not be sitting together. Now, there are lots of varieties of places that people like me will pray in and feel comfortable in. So some will pray in spaces where women have no part in anything in the service. Some will pray in places where the Torah scroll will get passed to a woman and will get taken through the women's section by that woman. Or women will be able to give a Dvar Torah or the sermon in the middle of the service or even at the end of the service and are seen as teachers. And some people might pray in what's known as a partnership minyan, where women are able to take part in leading parts of the service, such as Kabbalat Shabbat on Friday nights or Psukei de Zimra in the morning service. And there, they're also able to get aliyot, get called up to the Torah, and also read from the Torah. And some might also daven or pray in what's known as a women's tefillah group. So it's a group of women who are gathering together. They do not count themselves as a minyan, as a quorum, but we'll have someone who's acting as the leader. And there'll be groups of people who are reading the Torah and the Haftorah. So that would be, general prayer. And in many of the modern liberal open Orthodox communities, so where it also falls into prayer, I guess, is Simchat Torah. There will be dancing for women with a Torah and also have women's led Megillah reading. Sometimes by women only for other women, and sometimes it is a mixed men and women reading for mixed men and women.
Okay, that's really interesting, and it's wonderful to hear, and also, like, I guess, confusing for our audience to hear that within this subset of, I guess, orthodoxy, as is kind of what it sounds like. There are also different people within that and doing different practices, and that's interesting because I think we often think Reform, liberal, Orthodox, or modern Orthodox, whatever it is, that everyone in that space must be the same. If we aren't part of that community, we assume that group is a monolith. But I think what's really interesting talking to you is hearing that there's different practices, and often they center around, I guess, including women and raising women to the same status as a man when it comes to Jewish rituals that they may not have been part of because of previous kind of interpretations of the Jewish law.
Yeah, I would say at least the things I highlighted here are definitely it's about different interpretations of law and how were they interpreted, how are they continuing to be interpreted, and where within the halachic framework can there be room for this change. Okay,
great. It's really interesting and really helpful to see the categories kind of laid out really practically. I think that's really, really helpful. So I'm going to kind of throw out to our audience at this stage and say, what do these practices look like in your community or home? They may look a bit different to any denominations. You may do something really wonderful and wacky at home. Let us know what your Jewish practice looks like in the comments, and hopefully we can see some really interesting ones, or maybe they're the same as Eryn's, who knows? So what I'm going to do now is, we mentioned stereotypes at the beginning of this, and denomination really is about educating people about communities they may not be part of, to remove those stereotypes so we can have better community cohesion and better relationships between different communities. So what I'm going to ask you is, what's the biggest stereotype people have about your community or you, and what's the kind of the question that you get most, or the perception that people have about you that's most prominent? And talk a little about it.
Yeah, well, I would say there's two. Like, one is the personal of, I didn't know that women could be rabbis. Women can't really be rabbis. Definitely, you can't be an Orthodox rabbi. So that that would be my personal thing that people question all the time. And yes, it is actually very new, right? If the first Orthodox woman in America got ordained in 2009, that's not actually all that long ago. And so it does take time for that knowledge to get passed on, and also knowing that the US and the UK are not the same. And so, while I might have known people who have been part of certain organizations or have learned in certain institutions, that the deep connection with that might not have been as present. So that would be my personal, I didn't know this happens. That can't be true. You can't really be Orthodox. And it's like, no, I am. I would say as a global stereotype, the biggest one is probably that people who identify as liberal, open, modern, Orthodox are not really religious or observant, and they're super liberal about everything. Everything, anything can go, kind of thing. And I would say that's not true. I mean, I guess that's an easy way of talking about it. Yes, there are things that, in thinking about Orthodoxy as a black and white type of denomination, they're not fitting into the black and white. They're a lot in the gray. And so, yes, some of it will be more, I guess, liberal or lenient looking or sounding. But not everyone is always deciding on the most lenient path to be following. Not everyone's only following on the most stringent path. And I would say, at least from the people, my colleagues and people who I interact with, a lot of people are extremely learned and are extremely observant of the religion, and not something to be held against them.
That's really interesting. I'm just going to grab some water. There we go. A little bit of a cough. What I'm going to ask you about that, though, is how do you think we can improve that? Like, what would you prefer people to ask you when they first met you? You may be the first Orthodox female rabbi that someone meets. What would you prefer them to say? It may not be an easy question, but how would you want that conversation to actually go?
So the truth is the people who ask me and genuinely want to know, I really don't mind it when people say, wow, I never knew that there were Orthodox female rabbis. What does that mean? How does that work within your community? Or how does that work within Orthodoxy? Right? So for me, it's all about tone and intonation and what are they trying to get at? Versus when I've been asked the question, trying to trip me up or trying to eventually put me down or berate me or my colleagues, that's the bit that I don't appreciate.
Completely. No, that tone is really important, and I guess the intention behind what people want to know and how they want to relate. Are they trying to push down or trying to kind of just understand?
Yeah, I say to people, I'm open to answering almost every single question if it's coming from a place of genuine wanting to know and curiosity and knowledge.
Interesting. Okay, that's a really, really wonderful approach. I want to ask you just a bit more about that for a second. How does it make you feel when people ask the questions with a kind of a tone that's not helpful? I think it's important for people to know, and I'm going to ask this of each of our speakers and have done previously, it's important for people to understand what it does to a person when a question or a stereotype is applied to them in that way.
I get really defensive. I feel like everything almost tightening, that I need to be on and ready for whatever might come about. And sometimes I'll have the energy to fight, and sometimes I won't. And usually it's very hurtful and lonely and kind of scary and infuriating. Something I don't understand in the general world is why can't we talk with each other with respect? And just because you disagree with me doesn't mean that you have to treat me poorly.
100%. And I really appreciate you sharing of your experience, to just put out a little bit of what happens when someone applies a stereotype to a whole community or to an individual. I think it really affects how one sees themselves and puts them into a kind of defensive or hurt space. And I think that will be a theme with whatever stereotypes people are throwing out there. So in light of the kind of spirit of respect and love for lots of different types of Jews, I'm going to ask you a question about other denominations. I want to ask you, is there a particular thing that another community, and there may be many things, but pick your favorite, and doesn't say anything about other denominations other than what Eryn ends up saying, but just your favorite. What is another denomination doing that you're really excited about?
So I would say, I'm not really sure which denomination this really falls under, but I would say what I've been able to see especially from some of the work of my colleagues in Reform, liberal, Reconstructionist movements and others, but specifically those, is the ability to create ritual and create one's own prayer and making one's connection to God one's own. And then also actually talking about what's one's relationship to God. It looks really awesome, and it is exciting, and I find a different way of at least from what I've been taught, of how to interact with text and God.
That's really fascinating and really particular, and I love that kind of working out rituals that relate to you specifically and that personal relationship with God. That's really beautiful, and I'm glad that you shared that. I think it's really wonderful to hear, and I'm sure that the communities that are doing that kind of work, and I saw that you're kind of working with the Wellspring Project,
Yep.
who are doing similar things to that. That sounds really, really interesting. So this has been fascinating and informative. I'm going to ask you one last question. It's going to be a future thinking question, and then we're going to wrap up and let our wonderful viewers go about whatever they're doing at this time, bring out this wonderful kind of energy into the world. But what would you say is the future of your denomination? What are the three kind of biggest priorities for your community, or the values, the Jewish values that you put out there for the next 10 years? Kind of what does the future look like for your brand of Judaism?
So this is definitely a very hard question to look into or think about. But I think I sort of worked it out. What I think one is creating more space for those who feel marginalized or not accepted within the community and who desire to be part of the community. Whether that is women, people of color, LGBTQ+, people with disabilities, all of the people who fall there, and really working hard within the system of making open spaces. Because I think that if we don't do that, we're doing a massive disservice to so many people. Two would be about how is communal life going to look like after COVID, and also what needs to change. What are the things that we've learned during this time? What do we want to keep? What do we want to change? How do we want our spaces to look and interact with? This has been something that has, shaken the globe, to say the least. And if this isn't part of future thinking and interacting in our community, something is not right, in my opinion. And then the last one, and this was the hardest one to come up with, but I think I have the right wording, is dealing with hate. What do we do how do we talk about hate within our community, and how our community might talk about other communities, and what do we do with hate speech or hate think, and how do we try to combat that and change that?
Amazing. I mean, three really important kind of future focus points for us to think about: inclusion, what does life look like after COVID, and also that kind of working out how to deal with, I love that term, hate think, because sometimes it's speech, but often it's just kept inside and it brews, and it just doesn't have good consequences for anybody from any community. I'm really, really glad to have had you on Denomination, Rabbi Eryn. Really, it's been wonderful. I hope that everyone in our audience has appreciated this insight into modern liberal kind of open orthodoxy. It's complicated. It's a gray area. That's what this is about. And I think if that type of isn't your denomination, and learn a little bit more, reach out to people who are part of community, and talk to them and hear a lot more about what's going on for them from a personal point of view. But for now, it's goodbye from me, and we'll see you next week at 8:30, Mondays at 8:30 p.m. If you miss out, you can watch all the episodes on our Facebook and YouTube, which you can subscribe to and like. And please join our Young JW3 Facebook group as well. We post about all of our events coming up in that space, and it's a really wonderful community. So thank you, and hope you enjoyed.